And democracy doesn't mean that only the voice of SASCO should be heard. Then we would have to go back and organize. Comrade, I know the question on further education and training is not necessarily mine and mine alone. But, and comrades will reflect on it. I think the implications are vast and different. We understand the pressure to pass an act on further education and training before the end of Parliament, before the 1999 elections. It's one of those that had been provided for in the Yellow Book, the ANC policy document on education. It is a mandate to our comrades in the education department, from national and into provincial departments, to ensure that the Federal Education and Training Act, amongst other education acts, is passed, so that the process of education in the sector that is now known as technical colleges, mainly, I think the framework provides that from grades, this grade confusing. 10, 11, 12. That's N1 to 3. It becomes even more complicated when you use the N's, because then N4 to 6 become higher education. It's something that's rather complicated, but comrades are trying to ensure that it's passed before the end of this parliamentary session. We've made the submission, that submission on that aspect. Our views are shared with SATU, with COSATU, and with SACS. That one, the process has undermined a lot that usually has to be taken into account. For example, on the day that the final submissions were to be received on further education and training, Minister Bengu issued for national comment the draft bill on further education and training. Now, convention tells us that it's first green paper, and then out of green paper, white paper, and then a draft bill, and then an act. Now, it's a problem because, by assumption, that draft bill hasn't taken into account comments of others who were supposed to comment on the 29th of May, because on the very same day, the bill came out. So those concerns were raised. In fact, we have said to comrades in the ANC that they should summon, for lack of a better word, the Minister of Education and MECs, comrades, into an NECF of sorts, National Education Coordinating Forum, something that has been failing. And we just dedicate the whole day to further education and training and a discussion around that. What we are seeking to avoid, comrades, is what happened with processes in higher education, where the white paper had to be written and rewritten and rewritten 3 times, because comrades had not been consulted with earlier documentation. That should suffice. In other words, comrades, we acknowledge the constraints, but we feel that we cannot just do a rash form, simply because if Parliament doesn't pass it now, we might not win the elections, and we might not be able to pass it and act on further education and training at the later sitting of Parliament. Which the act that we pass will be an act that we can be sure about. I do not know. Okay, the strategy for statutes, comrades. I think it also goes with institutional forums and our attitude towards them, and how we participate in those forums. Assuming that depending on the balance of forces, we can utilize them in the same way that we utilize ATMs. The Act provides that the institutional statutes should be written by councils, but the process should start in institutional forums. Those institutional statutes, it's more of a chicken and egg situation, because institutional statutes will also provide how institutional forums are constituted, but those same institutional forums should develop institutional statutes. It's more of something like that. Now, comrades, And those statutes should have been submitted, should have been concluded upon by June 1999, which means institutions are under pressure to do that. Other institutions have already started those processes. My institution director has written it on our behalf. He knows what we need. He has written it on our behalf and we will discuss his own views. But the fact of the matter remains, comrades, that the same approach that we have always had, our attitude in BTFs and our approach towards transformation in respective institutions, will still have to apply in respect to institutional forums and in respect to how we then develop institutional statutes. Where we had been failing and where we have to close the loophole is that there had not been coordination between what is happening in, say, Vista and what is happening in technical Northern County and what is happening in the University of the North as a reflection of our strengths and weaknesses, but also a shortcoming, a limitation of coordination on our side as an organization. I insist that the Higher Education Act provides an opportunity in that regard, because one of the main reasons why there's been that shortcoming in coordination, in uniformity, has been largely because the statutes governing institutions, the acts governing different institutions have been different. Now we are going to be, all institutions have been governed by the same type of statute, the same type of act. And it is according to that act that will then be able to use a uniform approach towards the whole process of institutional state.
Yeah, comrades, I'm aware that sometimes the noise has been caused by hunger. Comrades, allow me to give each and every comrade here 5 minutes to respond, so that at least by 2:30 we go for lunch. Because it's 10 past. I'm sorry, comrades, you have asked questions and they need responses. So please, bear with me. Comrade Lebukhan, for flexibility. Comrade Jacob, is it an announcement?
Please suggestion before Comrade Lebukhan.
Okay, go.
That maybe we must, I think that Comrade, on our policy issues as Comrade this week, I think there's a need to make a follow-up after this policy. I don't think it's not about hunger. But I want to suggest that we take another round. Compared to a hunger, you don't create a crisis if you don't eat in the next 2 minutes. But I want to propose that we go back.
Comrade.
Maybe not on the entire one.
Okay. Comrade, I think clear what the president has said. Comrade Lebukhan. Comrades, can we be silent?
Yeah, Comrade Chair, I want to start by answering the question which was posed by Comrade Sito on the schools giving powers to decide on the language policy and admission policy. Our argument is that the National Ministry must create a broad framework, and there's nothing wrong about giving schools powers to decide on language policy and admission policy, as long as that language policy and that admission policy is within the context of the broader framework which is created by the Ministry of Education. On the question of funding of schools, we also argue as scholars that funding should be biased toward the poor of the poorest. Thus, we argue that private schools must not get funding from the government or must not be subsidized by the government. Because we believe that those people who go in those schools are those people who have money, who can be able to pay for themselves. But apart from that, those schools also advance what you call class division within society. And as scholars, we can't afford to have those schools being funded by the state. Because of the money which is used to fund those schools, it is the taxes of our parents, and therefore we cannot agree as scholars. On the question of, I just want to comment on what Comrade Advocate mentioned earlier on about the role of SAG. The what you call teachers, SAG has been perceived as a salary organization. I want to say, according to my own view, situation varies from area to area, from school to school. But what is happening is that there is an element within SAG, which have that perception that SAG is about salaries and that student activists are their enemies. There is that element. And I think that's a challenge for SAG. Maybe SAG has a program on dealing with such problem. I just wanted to comment on that, to say it's not every SAG member that is having that attitude toward student activities. On what Comrade raised about the involvement of the disabled in the policy making processes, is that unfortunately at the tertiary sector, there is no an organized structure of disabled. However, as COSAS, we believe we also have a responsibility to represent them. Therefore, in our submissions, in our policies, we also consider them. But beyond that, COSAS, we have decided to broaden our base to reach disabled, to reach colors, to reach whites. And I think in the near future, we'll be having disabled, whites, and colors in COSAS. And those also speaking for themselves within COSAS will not be assuming that this is what they need, but if we have the latest. And I also want to agree with comrades with that COSAS is not only for normal people, must also cater for disabled. Thus, we have considered broadening our base to reach those students. On the question of Comrade Tembinkosi, as COSAS, we believe that the state has a responsibility to provide education for what you call, or to educate young people of this country. However, that is not their sole responsibility. Our parents also have the responsibility to contribute toward our education system. On Comrade Chilisi, when he says when the wedding COSAS, they perceived parents as reactionaries, that is what he said. But now we COSAS do not perceive parents as reactionaries and tenants. By saying that parents are not taking a leading role in our education, that doesn't mean they are reactionary. Well, the question of illiteracy, to some extent, is having an impact in the input that our parents are making in what we call in our education transformation. That's as far as we are calling and we are supporting the establishment of the Association of Catholic Bodies. Because we believe that such a structure, it will be a structure which will capacitate the parents so that they will be able to impact positively in our education. As of the program to go out and educate our parents in an endeavor of alleviating illiteracy, unfortunately, we do not have such a program. But I think as soon as the Association of Catholic Bodies, I think it will launch this month. That is where COSAS will be contributing about how many people or what kind of programs should be developed so as to capacitate our parents to contribute in the policy matters. Thanks.
Thank you. Comrade, let me go to Comrade Berry.
Thanks, comrades. I'll try to be quick. I agree with the criticism that the language and admission policy is too sensitive a matter to be left with bodies of ours. And it's clear that policy framework. How the national legislation reads is it says subject to any provincial law. And in the Gauteng Schools Act, we constrain the language policy very, very, very tightly with about a page of legislation which constrains how the language policy must operate. And in terms of admission policy, also gazetted regulations which govern admissions policy. So there's no room for governing bodies to move in terms of language policy and admission policy. I'm not sure how broadly that's gone across all of the other provinces. And by the way, that's one of the problems, is that there's no monitoring of development of legislation within provinces in terms of how they're taking forward the various regulations and legislation that is necessary. I agree also with Comrade Seaport that there needs to be monitoring of the implementation of norms and standards, and my understanding of an ANC reading of the Constitution is that that's the responsibility of the national government. If government accepts this, if the Constitution gives a level of government responsibility, then that responsibility must be coherent and it must be consistent. And if national government has a responsibility to set norms and standards, it also has responsibility to monitor the implementation of norms and standards. And it is a national government responsibility. I think that otherwise the Constitution wouldn't make sense. So this question in terms of funding of schools, and where are we now with current policy developments in relation to free education? Is it clear from the norms and standards document for school funding that education will be free for the poor, but not free for the wealthy? And that this is a phase in terms of our progress towards achieving free education for all, which is determined by the material conditions under which we're operating. So people who have access to wealth will be required to make contributions towards the cost of the education at the level of schools. But for the poor at schools, education is free. In terms of funding private schools, the last public document of the norms and standards for school funding said for private schools that there would be a differential subsidy which would take into account the levels of wealth and poverty of those private schools, and that wealthy schools would be funded less than schools that serve the poor than are private schools. The latest draft, which is not a public document, I think, of the norms and standards for school funding is much more radical in that private schools will only be funded if they charge below a certain amount in terms of fees. And the only schools that will receive funding will be incredibly poor private schools. Most private schools, in terms of the latest document, will receive no funding at all. I actually think that we need a very serious political discussion about that, and I'm not sure that we're going to agree, because I think that it's going to be a very bad tactical move of the ANC to move into wiping out all of the private schools just prior to the election. You might think that's not a really principled position, but I think that in terms of politics, it's going to be major disruptions if that position goes ahead. And I know that the minister is thinking about it. I think one of the points that I wanted to make about democratization was the space that we create when we create our democratic institutions of governance. We need to make sure that the left and the progressive movement is mobilized to occupy those spaces. So we created spaces in terms of saying there will be democratically elected school governing bodies in all of our schools. But I'm not sure that we actually mobilized successfully enough, other than in some parts of the country, to ensure that we actually were electing the leadership of the democratic movement into those governing bodies. And I think that it's a very important lesson for every structure of governance that we establish, the Council of Higher Education, the councils of our institutions themselves. Once we've struggled for the creation of a democratic institution, a democratic structure, the struggle is not over, because we've got to make sure that we hold the balance of power within each of those institutions that we create. Tulas mentioned the Gauteng Education and Training Council, for example, and that's a representative structure of all sectors of education. Within Gauteng, it's a complete struggle all of the time for the left to maintain hegemony within that council. And I might just comment that not all of the student organizations are necessarily attend meetings of those councils, because we're not occupying the space that we ourselves have created for democratic participation. I also want to agree with both comments that have been made by both Chilezi and the President, that the alliance needs to be providing coordinated leadership in education consistently throughout the year. We don't just need some policy forum once every so often. We need a national education coordinating forum. That decision has been taken several times. The last time we met in National Education Coordinating Forum, I understand was gathering and whereas the last time it was meeting. So where provincial education coordinating forums exist, they've got nowhere to report. And I know that that's been a source of frustration even in terms of political work with TASCO and provinces, because there might be a national piece of policy legislation, but there's nowhere for the ANC or the movement to take policy debates to a national forum. The question from Pinky and also from Zweli is there's a commission of inquiry into education for learners with special educational needs. That includes all types of disability. And the basic thrust of that commission of inquiry, which has been accepted as policy, which is part of the paper, is that the approach of a democratic South African state to people who have various forms of disability is that they need to be included as functioning members of the society with a disability. So rather than separate them and treat them as islands, as far as possible they should be included within the mainstream of society as full members of society. Now, that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be separate educational institutions, and there will still be special schools. For some forms of disability, such as, for example, being deaf, requires separate education facilities because, in fact, you're using a different language. You have a different language, sign language, if you are deaf. But as far as possible and where it's practicable, learners with special educational needs will be accommodated within institutions. There hasn't yet, really, to my knowledge, been any discussion about creating a separate higher education institution for the disabled. And I think that part of the policy position of the movement around inclusion would argue for learners with various forms of disability to be accommodated within mainstream organizations rather than being isolated from the life of normal life of society. The question of teachers' colleges, there's two questions that you've raised. One is the question of the curriculum, and the other is the question of the future of training teachers. The colleges of education are a national function. In the interim constitution, they were understood to be provincial functions, but it became very clear that the ANC position was that colleges would become national structures. The problem at the moment is that national hasn't yet taken over those institutions, but some of us have been pushing very hard for national to take over those institutions, and I think that's going to start happening from 1999. So from 1999, national should take over the higher education institutions, the teachers' colleges, and those teachers' colleges are the responsibility of the national government in terms of transformation of the curriculum. Provinces don't have a role at all. In terms of the future of educators, we do still need teachers. We do still need teachers to be trained. It's not that all teachers that qualify from teachers' colleges will not be able to get posts. There's many teachers that have qualified in the last couple of years who are currently teaching in schools, and I meet them all of the time. The challenge for the national government is the question of proper planning around the provision of teachers so that we are training the right number of teachers. The teacher training will continue to exist as a need, and it needs to be carefully planned. One of the problems is that the government has direct control in terms of how many children and students are admitted to teachers' colleges, but at higher education levels, in terms of universities, it's a complete matter of choice, and there's very little government planning that goes into it, as well as creating possibilities for academic possibilities for students. And the further education bill is not a systems bill, it's actually an institutional bill. And what we were looking for was a systems bill, a bill that would create a new system of further education rather than just institutions. So I'm not going to engage in debates about the higher education process. I think that already has indicated that that seems to happen. I'm not going to also, because of time, and I can sense the restlessness. This question of the Constitution and national and provincial competencies. I'm putting the agenda on discussion for proper debate. I don't think we can have a debate now, but I think that debate is necessary. Coletti is saying that it's not an ambivalent, it's a clear contradiction in terms of the ANC having made specific concessions. But we as an creates a unitary state. And that power is there in the Constitution. And we need to not have any ambivalence about ladies and women. I'm very sure of that. The last thing is to get his argument around equity and redress. I think basically my understanding is that the only way that we can achieve equity is through redress. And that's my understanding. Thank you.
I want to start with some of the latest comments by Comrade Mary and say, I agree with Comrade. Now we are talking about we need to campaign for 2/3 majority so that we change it. Change it on what? Because we have realized that there are certain areas where we have been compromised. That's why we're talking 2/3 majority, including this issue of the provincial power. But how we are going to do it, I think that's what we still need to do. Secondly is, this question of the students coming from the colleges, what is their future? We need to accept one thing, that the design of the previous system was such that there was an overproduction of teachers in certain fields, deliberately and neglecting certain areas. And we are saying our colleges and universities cannot continue today to produce the very same type of a teacher, whereas the needs now have changed. So we need also in our institutions to redirect teachers to say, we need to train them more in the areas where we feel that there's a great need. We are not saying social sciences or languages are not important, but I think there has been an overemphasis and an overproduction. Therefore, we need now also to be biased in our new training. Otherwise, if we continue according to the old mechanisms, we are going to produce teachers which are unemployable, not just who are unemployed, unemployable. I think you can see what is happening. You go to every school. You hear the parents saying, I don't want my children to do the subject which I did. I want them to be biased towards maths, commerce, and so on. I'm not saying education should just be about technical skills, but they do count when you talk about the economy and where people are going to be employed in the long run. So I therefore say the teacher training was not balanced the way it was planned. And I think Comrade Melly is correct to say some of them we still employ them, we need them, but the way they've been produced, there has been a problem. The other part which I also want to confirm, comrades, is the one which says, so comrades, we accept. In fact, that's why we are talking about equity and redress. Those to us, they go together. But we accept that we are not going to be able to reach equity overnight. We are arguing that we need to have what we call a transformation budgeting plan. And included in that, we must have an implementation plan, which is going to be over time. We must be able to say, in terms of our plan in education, over the next 5 years, this is going to be our focus. Maybe over the next 10 years, this is going to be our focus. That's why people have been talking about a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and so on. So that we are able to say, to measure ourselves and say, after 5 years, we've been able to do X. After 10 years, we've been able to do that. We know that the resources are limited. Hence, we must talk about plans and say how, and develop implementation strategies. And Comrade Mary says, space is being created. And we have been arguing for that space. In some instances, space has been created, but we have not been able to utilize that space. That's not the mistake of the government. It is also our mistake. We have to do some self-reflection, whether we are occupying all the space which has been created for us. One example, I've raised it with the president yesterday, because I was requested to raise this matter, was that we know that it's the organization you're in control of it, SACSA. It's SACSA. SACSA has requested for space in one body, which is called an ADCOM, an Advisory Committee for Technical Colleges, around the exams. They've requested for space there, and they say they are representing all the student bodies. We have argued as such, we have said, no, we're not going to admit them. Firstly, we don't know them. If they are really representing SASCO or representing COSAS or whatever, we don't know them. And second, we have said the people we want is SASCO and those organization so that they come and put their own position. Comrade, education is ideological. That structure, SACSA, you might control it today. Tomorrow it might be controlled by the Africanists. The other day it might be controlled by the Africanists, and so on and so on. So we need to be very careful that because of these organizations which are coordinating, we sacrifice our organization. Because that organization which is coordinating is supposed to be neutral. Huh? But when you put positions there, because positions there are ideological, which position of which organization are going to put? So it depends at that particular time who is in control of it. And don't ever think, and history has shown us, that SASCO at times lose the SRCs. You lose the SRCs to other bodies. And therefore, once they are in control of that body, they are going to put their position. So in that structure, we want our own organizations. We don't want a structure which is going to say we are neutral. Further comrades, but comrades should not feel bad. Sometimes it is necessary. But when you are dealing with contestation, you must know who is on your side. And when you are formulating policy, we are dealing with contestation. Further, comrades, on the national norms and standards, I think comrades really has answered. The monitoring is for the national government to see to it that its policy is monitored. But it's for us as organizations, as of the MTN, to raise with our MPs, our representatives in government, and in the various levels of the government, that we feel that in terms of this implementation, things are not going accordingly. And we can only do that if we have this coordinating forum. And I think we've been talking about this witness. The question is now, what do we do? Who is the first to deal with this question? I mean, since we dissolved the NECC, we talked about this coordination forum that we made a mistake, but what are we doing about it? Your responsibility as SASCO, as COSAS, as SATU, and the ANC. And comrades, on the SGBs, if we are not serious about this association, you know, some of the already organized small white associations, they are already quickly going into our schools and appealing to the parents to join into this association. And the direction is going to change. Unless us again we move very quickly, then we are in danger. Already the little which we have done was to say the coordination at provincial levels, and that committee which has been set, has committed to fund that coordination so that we don't lose the direction of that particular body. And one of the problems is the crisis around the funding. I think we're taking out about half of the funding to say this is our contribution so that we have our own cadres running and setting up this structure at provincial level. In the Western Cape, I don't know who has set that particular structure. I don't believe that is us. The last part, comrades, is, which I want to raise, for Comrade Pinky and Comrade Sweden, as part of our little contribution to the disabled, all SATU policy documents now are starting to bring them in print because we've recognized that within our own organization we have the members. Therefore, we should not just demand from the government, what are we doing with it? So we're starting to recognize, but it's a bit by bit. Corporate advocates, we need not to fall into a trap. We need not to fall into a trap of using other people's language, which is very dangerous. ISASCO is being accused of being a financial exclusion agency for students. Other people who are running away from that reality are saying ISASCO is out of court. Comrade, ISASCO won't have membership if it doesn't deal with the issues which are close to the heart and the mind of the students. Yeah. And one of the painful issues now and the issues of the day is the issues of the finances. If you disregard that, you won't have membership. So I'm trying to say, therefore, on the basis of that, you cannot allow, and you agree, because the principles which are raised about strategy is the same. What we are saying, whether we like it or not, any trade union, you mobilize your members around their conditions of service. If a union fails to do that, even in the private sector, the membership will abandon it. Simple and clear, it's like that. That's why in some of the Marxist readings, people will claim that unions in their nature are reformists. The only way which you have to mobilize the thousands and the numbers is through using issues which are appealing to their hearts and their minds. And two, the workers, it's always the issue of the salaries and their conditions. That's why it's always high. But a union like ourselves is supposed to balance the two. But if you neglect the salaries and the conditions of service, it must close shop. Teachers won't follow it. So what I'm trying to say, therefore, we need therefore to be very careful not to put these labels. And what is important, we need to say, let's try and develop programs. Secondly, not all SASCO members agree the letter and even the spirit in terms of the principles and policies of the SASCO. Some of the members, they are just members of the SASCO for the sake of. So it's the same with teachers. Some of them is just for the salary. But I think we must check between the individual and organizational positions. I think that is very important. Therefore, you need to be very careful to put the labels. So what we are trying to say is look at the organizational positions and say, what programs are you putting to educate those? And the unorganized will remain being thousands. But what we are also starting to say, that's the positive side, try and put political education programs so that your members are able, in practice, to articulate your policies, be it around corporal punishment, be it whatever. But remember, you have to educate the people. And remember, these are the very same people who were educated in the philosophy which says, in order for a child to deliver, you must beat. And at the policy level, there's no problem. But if you can listen to the parents, you listen to the very same teachers, you can feel that there's a discord. And you can only be able to deal with that by coming up with an education program. And I think that's the positive side. Thank you.
No, comrades, you can't continue. You can't. You can't do that. You can't. Comrades, firstly, comrades, I think misinterpreted my remark on the proposal made by the president of SASCO. Comrades, it's just unfortunate. See, if you check the session 2, we'll be talking about higher education. So the issue of comrade president will be addressed at the time. So I think now you understand. Secondly, comrades, maybe I should apologize on behalf of SASCO, Comrade Godfrey, for having to postpone arrangements with more than an hour. But I hope that you accept that on our behalf. And comrades, as we are closing this session, comrades, it's 18 minutes to 3. And I must apologize. There's nothing that I can play. Comrades, it is important that we engage ourselves in these issues. Hence, a necessity for such workshops and seminars that will start to enrich others. So, comrades, listening is compulsory. Comrades, Simon, can you stop those comrades to move out? Because we will definitely move out. Comrades, already 3. So, comrades, we are expected to be back at 4. And lastly, comrades, let us be disciplined. Nobody will come and say you must come to the hall. 4 we're supposed to be starting here. So that's how we come to the end of the first session today.
number of sites. So I think that we must not dwell much on what the comrade has said. We must just try to assist, in terms of locating the person of this prosperity. The other thing is that I will take something. I have a problem with branches concept. Comrade Jacob, you may not have made it. Maybe you will assist. Comrade from Lance Network will collect your delegation, and head of provinces are requested to collect your branches. This thing that branches will just live without education is problematic, comrades. We expect comrades to be fully in charge of their own delegates. And I want that comrade man that another comrade from comrade GS will also assist to collect those comrades. We can't be eating at this time. It's notorious what we're doing. We're creating chaos in this political process. It's counter-revolutionary what is happening. Comrade Saben.
Thanks for saying details of the content. So being in the process, that will be even clarified by NSC, and obviously meeting pieces when they go out in terms of implementing this. But I just wanted to check whether is there a possibility of some augmentation around this provincial prosperity? Because for instance, if I can count, and I want also to check that the view of the NEC, because we're able also, when we were responding to this prosperity as Eastern Cape, we're able to say what is our view around this, and within which context we view the prosperity, without saying that it is not necessary. We agree in principle that they are necessary. But we're able also to put a context which must fit the conditions that are there, whilst also it's located within a broader program of the transition that is at a national level. And we think those proposals were presented, and we said we would also love to get a feedback from the NEC in relation to what is its view in relation to that proposal. Precisely that was informed by the fact that we were able to indicate that within a period of a month or so, we're able to pull two provincial gatherings to a larger extent, also through the observation of NEC members that were deployed. We're able to touch on a number of areas that might have been raised. We understand that maybe in other provinces that might not have thus far happened. And we're of the view that it might not be that relevant in terms of therefore being confined in terms of that. And therefore we might even augment around certain areas. I just wanted to check whether the NEC has been able to meet and therefore pronounced around that, so that we can be able, when we go back, at least we know, and begin to therefore shape whatever that needs to be discussed within that particular context. That's the clarity that I wanted to get from comments.
I think that to me, the national and provincial prosperity, the theme of such events should be going back to basics. So that what we print in our tissue should really be reflected in such events. But I think also, Jefferson, we should be able to say we must be able to engage with the objective realities that are characterizing the countries of now, higher education sector in particular. The whole question of the higher education. My suspicion is that most often than not, some branches do not actually understand some of the processes that are happening at the national level in terms of your legislative schedules and so forth and so forth, the expectation. For an example, by September 30th, 1988, all institutions of higher learning must actually submit their Amendments Act or draft plan. And I've got a strong suspicion that perhaps most of the branches may not have that information. So I'm saying that it becomes necessary that in such events we really have to engage with those issues and ensure that as an organization we are taking concrete decisions in terms of ensuring that those things are created. Secondly, Chairperson, I think that the involvement of COSAS should not only take place at the national level. I think also at the provincial level we must be able to involve our comrades of COSAS. Because I think that this is the organization that actually rules. And we should be able to ensure that those comrades who are still at COSAS are also getting this opportunity of engaging with this contribution. And thirdly, Chair, in terms of the National Governance Summit, an understanding was created that we should be able to demonstrate consistency and continuity in terms of the policy work of the organization. And if we understand the strategic perspective of transformation document, it deals with an aspect of policy. And it was understood in the governance summit that there should be a SASCO national training unit. So that you are going to have a number of comrades who are going to be trained thoroughly on specific subjects. So that now we are able to say that you are not actually reactionary as an organization in terms of dealing with particular vendors. But you know that you are going to actually deploy your cadres to particular provinces, to particular institutions to deal with those things. So that you have your SASCO experts on macroeconomic issues, SASCO experts on legislative issues, SASCO experts on national youth service. So that we really don't repeat some of this. And I still want to maintain that it is necessary, Chairperson, that the Political Education Department of the organization and it should be able to train this number of people on those subjects. And lastly, I think, Chair, we'll have to really develop an implementable program for the 1999 elections. We are saying also in our t-shirts, voter registration, ID, and so forth and so forth. But I think that we should emerge out of this postulate to say, what do we mean practically? To say we are going to take students to voter registration, to take IDs, and to ultimately vote for an African National Congress. And I want to submit that when we emerge out of this postulate, we should be having a concrete program to say that as SASCO, we are going to deploy, or this province will be responsible for this particular campaign. This institution should be responsible for this particular campaign. So that what the President said yesterday, in terms of his political input, to say there is a culture of not wanting to develop discussion documents. So that when we go to provincial hospital, when we go to Eastern Cape, we should be able to say that Eastern Cape Technical, in advance, we are given a task to develop a discussion document on abortion or on this particular subject. So that when you go to a hospital, you're not only expecting members of the NEC to really present discussions as NEC or as individuals, but you really involve branches, you really involve provinces in terms of our political discussion.
Yeah, conversation with problems and weaknesses now. I think those things are part and parcel of what the NEC is supposed to be. And I don't think that this meeting must deal with that. I think those issues must be taken to the National Executive Committee to continuously make a political assessment of the organization. The point that I want to make is one of the objectives. Just before that, I want to reaffirm to Comrade Manda that the other problem is that we have not yet got the report in terms of what is supposed to be the program from now. But I am convinced, comrades, that concretely would emerge with something out of this postulate. And I think that we should leave that discussion to comrades who are coming. I don't think that we must preempt whatever is going to be presented as a report. I think we must wait for those comrades to put the package together. But I think there's something concrete. The other point, comrades, is to say that the reason why we also worked so hard to get this notion of postulates endorsed by it is because, comrades, we also realized that as the NEC, we have not been able to make an intervention into the crisis that faces provinces in terms of resources. And in exception of training as we understand it with it, this postulate will also afford provinces to make an analysis, because most of the provinces have got a crisis that are unable to put up resources. Of course, not all of them. To put up resources and do exactly what comrades are raising as problems that will add to this organization. So this postulate will give provinces the opportunity to come together and also say, this is how we are going to implement a program in the next quarter and towards quarter. So I think that even those comrades where there might have been postulates and so, national meetings and analysis of provinces and so on and so on, I think that it will still be important for us, comrades, to gear ourselves, to prepare ourselves as to how do we approach the second term. And I wanted to say that, comrades, maybe, I know it might be seen as repetition and boring to always bring your branches together, and you might even realize that you are actually discussing the same issues. But our expectation is that out of here, comrades, there is going to be a different program that will take us somewhere and will deal with what George was raising. And therefore, provinces must be able to strategically say, this is how we are going to move now. And this is my understanding. And lastly, comrades, I think that the other problem is we never really offered E2 the opportunity to conduct training. When we and E2 said we want to do training in Shaft 17, we smuggled that opportunity to deal with our own issues. And we said to E2 that we'll set up another process. So now when we're supposed to do that here, unfortunately, there's not really been, because this was organized differently with the agency education department, we did not incorporate E2 training into this. It's pure political way. So there's still a need for us to really give E2 that opportunity. So I think that's basically some of the information that we want to give to comrades. But really this is about provinces being able to adopt their own programs and deal with their own organizational matters.
Because I think that it was very much surprised in terms of listening, so I wanted to respond to you specifically. I never raised the issue of the elections, the successive elections. I talked about what it is in terms of the history of the student movement, national movement, and the role of the student movement in general. And in relation to what I was raising in terms of whether we take or not, I thought that the organization is just a question of civility. I don't think we must address the question of civility. What I used was in relation to what community was saying, but it's not, I think I'll address it with the way outside. Comments, what comments Matiba raised around numbers of people who are supposed to raise. I thought that provincial executive had communicated with the branches. But actually, we are going to have a number of 40 people, which would mean that we have 10 PC that comment will see how they take from branches. But the other problem which we realize is that you will say 40 across provinces. The problem is that it might be possible in Northwest or Western Cape. But in the Eastern Cape or Northern Province or county where you have many branches, it becomes a problem in terms of representing their branches. So we'll see how we grab the group. Maybe provinces must also tell us in relation to, they must also give head office information in relation to what is happening. So that if it's possible to be able to increase the number. But then what we have agreed with each about in relation to the numbers which is supposed to attend to the provincial which is 40. The other issue which was raised by Professor around incorporating some of the issues. I think I discussed with you extensively, around what Eastern Cape was raising. I think it was the issue of the national leadership and training workshop, which must be incorporated within the program. I don't think that we will not allow that to the space for provinces. They want to ensure that perhaps they suggest something together. I think we'll be flexible. We will not say that whether or not this is our issues which are supposed to be discussed. So I think comments, that particular issue was raised by Professor is catered for. I think I'm tempted not to respond to what Nkosinathi raised. But I think what he raised, some of the issues he raised, maybe comments was supposed to report it, to report in relation to what commissions were discussing. Because part of what he was raising is part, I think it was discussed in the so I don't see something want to respond to that. But before I sit down, I want to appeal as the SGO country. I want to appeal to provinces comment. Maybe I don't have to be having this particular that out of all processes which went through, provinces are not responding. We had one time to pay already for institutions which are supposed to be used. None of, except, as I said earlier on, I think I know that we came to go to 14. But in other provinces, comrades, I do not get indication of what is supposed to happen. And I want to appeal to provinces before I sit down, comrades. This appeal must go through. Comrades must listen to this particular appeal. I'm appealing to provinces. I'm appealing to chairpersons and secretaries specifically that before they leave today, they must come and meet, and they must come and meet me, so that we can finalize about logistics in general, the numbers, the venue, and everything. Because we don't want a situation where a week or 2 days or 3 days before the particular things happen, comrades will phone us and say that we have changed. But I'm saying that those dates which are it's just unfortunate that we met and we agreed. I have communicated with provinces and they never indicated any problems in relation to dates which I gave. But I think that each has agreed itself for those dates which are there, which I gave to provinces. Because they will be focusing more on SRC. Yeah, I think those are some.
Yeah, thanks. I think comrades, because I don't think that necessarily the issues that have been raised are not going to be addressed. You will see in some of the inputs that some of the issues that are raised, they overlap with the issue that is supposed to be discussed through a especially about Mabuza was you know. So that I want to democratically suppress the head. That maybe your input will be more relevant in terms of what then becomes the program of this workshop. And I just don't want to waste some comments. I think the comments are finished. Maybe it is their task. Is that urgent in China? Is it burning? Because I wanted to give the comment that the comment will make input after he has presented the program of the age. Mchana, is that speak, Mchana?
Organized, which are intact. But those branches can remain frustrated if they do not have a leadership that guides their programs. We think that it is important for the NEC to coordinate all provinces, to improve on the communication lines between the national office and the provinces and branches, because that has also contributed to the strength of the organization. We have been discussing this in our meeting that we had last night and the night before. The need to improve communication lines between the national office and provinces. We think it is important, comrades, to observe the constitutional right by provinces to start organizing to go into provincial congresses, because that is where they will be able to seek the mandates that should enable them to implement a program of action. Comrades, I do not wish to go into detail, but I think on the overall what we're saying is that the organization exists, the organization is intact, the organization has certain weaknesses, we need to act on those weaknesses. In order to look at the program, we've isolated 3 broad areas which we think should complement the overall program of the organization. That is higher education transformation, SRC elections, and the 1999 elections. Those are the areas from the different commissions that we have had, which we feel should constitute some of the focal areas for the program for the next semester. With regard to higher education transformation, it is important to comment that this remains one of the center areas for the existence of SASCO. We exist because we advocate for the transformation of higher education. And we feel that there has been major progress and major strides in the transformation of several institutions and the higher education governance in general. But there are areas which are still lacking. We feel that With regard to governance, there's been a number of frustrations in terms of participation of students and other stakeholders in governance of institutions, which should ultimately ensure the transformation of that institutions. Partly that has been because of the structures that exist, which are supposed to implement or which are supposed to advocate that governance. Comrades, we have observed a limitation with regard to the Higher Education Act legislation on the powers between councils and institutional forums. It has become vague why there must be more powers granted to councils, whereas the very same structures that sit in councils sit in institutional forums. And this has only reduced institutional forums into advisory committees, weakened them, and has maintained the powers with management and council in general. We resolved, comrades, to campaign for more powers to be granted to institutional forums. But comrades, it is going to be useless for us to sit back and say that institutional forums do not have powers and therefore we cannot struggle. This campaign is not supposed to substitute or replace the commitment and struggle with regard to education transformation in tertiary institutions. But we feel that having noted that yes, the Higher Education Act has been enacted, we can still campaign for more powers to be granted to institutional forums, because that will form the base for us to weaken the very strong, sometimes undemocratic councils. Comrades, we have observed that the further education and training process has not been to our expectations. As reported, the process has been rushed. The process has not enabled for massive participation by stakeholders. The Green Paper discussion and submissions were not incorporated into the subsequent bill, which is supposed to be tabled in Parliament. We feel that there is need for more debates to take place and more time to be offered in the further education and training process. We feel that as SASCO, we must advocate for the need by the ministry to extend the time for submissions, because as it is now, the process does not allow for us to comment into even the contents of that bill or green paper. This will have to be done, obviously, comrades, through programs that strengthen our own mass force. We feel we must join hands with SACSA in its program of action to make sure that the ultimate result of the further education and training bill is a result that has incorporated a major consultative process, just like the process of the Higher Education Act. SACSA has outlined a mass action program as a result of the frustrations of the process. We feel that we need to enter into discussions with SACSA, discussions that should lead into a clear, pronounced program by SASCO on the intervention of further education and training. We think that it is important for the Department of Education and Transformation in the National Office to investigate the extent to which the rush by the government to enact the bill on further education is complemented with the need to democratize the institutions that fall under this sector. Because much as we say that the process must be prolonged and allow for consultation, it is also important to note that technical colleges remain one of the most untransformed institutions in tertiary education. They remain with one of the most undemocratic councils. Some of them don't even have those councils, are run by managements which are still white, Afrikaner, male-dominated. And we need to change that. But comrades, our struggles are not struggles of legislation. Much as we can focus our attention on the legislative process, it is also important for SASCO to adopt a program that begins to focus on the transformation of technical colleges in particular. And that program does not necessarily depend on the legislation. But we feel that what has been happening in the Johannesburg Technical College, what has been happening in Roodepoort Technical College, the mass struggle by students to ensure that there is transformation and change in those institutions, to bring about democratic SRC, democratic councils. Those are the pressures that will actually even impact on the legislative process. Comrades, one of our main areas which we need to put serious attention on is with regard to financial and academic exclusions. As a matter of tactic, and to some extent even responsibility, SRCs in different campuses have entered into agreements with managements which sought to register students in the beginning of the year, whom otherwise would not be registered because they owed the institutions huge sums of money. Some of those agreements are going to backfire in the coming semester because they've got limitations, they've got restrictions. Some of the students are expected to have paid either 50%, 80%, or all the amount of money that they need, that they owed to institutions before they can be registered again for the coming semester. And we are saying that, comrades, there are signals in different institutions that students are going to be massively deregistered because of those pacts, or because of even further policies that the management have put in place to resolve their financial situation. We are saying, comrades, we need to focus on the intensification of the Right to Learn campaign, because we have said it over and over again that the Right to Learn campaign is not a campaign for the beginning of the year. It's a campaign that seeks to ensure that students have got maximum access to institutions throughout the year, and hence the campaign must take place throughout the year. We call upon the National Executive Committee, PCs and branches to intensify the Right to Learn campaign in such a way that they protect the registration and the access of students into these institutions. Obviously, comrades, there are different methods in which to do that. In particular institutions, it will be important for us to yet again see ourselves interact in certain confrontations with management that are adamant on policies that are going to deregister students. So it will be important, out of analysis and observation, out of strategizing, to resolve on mass action that ultimately seeks to protect the access of students. But we are saying that, comrades, what we need to do is to utilize the coming provincial strategizing lekhutas or bosperas to assess situations in different institutions and to come up with a strategy that seeks to make sure that no student is excluded on the basis of financial exclusion. Comrades, there are institutions in the white, liberal, and especially Afrikaner sector who have sought time immemorial to exclude students on the basis of their academic performance. They have claimed to register a lot of students in the beginning of the year, but down the middle of the year, those students are removed out of the system because they have not performed well. Comrades, we are saying that, as we have pronounced before, this revolving door syndrome by these institutions, which are more liberal and Afrikaner in their character, cannot be allowed to happen in the next semester, because we feel that students should be given the maximum opportunity to prove themselves throughout the year, and they should be given the maximum support in order to perform better, because obviously of their historical background and historical origin. So we're saying, comrades, it will also be important to focus on these particular institutions, whom it is known historically that by this time of the year, they massively exclude students for their own intentions for their own programs that seek to weaken our transformation agenda. And we're saying, comrades, if it needs be, we'll need to adopt a mass action program that is directed towards Afrikaner institutions who are going to massively exclude students for academic reasons. Comrades, with regard to the implementation of the Higher Education Act, we have noted that the one immediate issue that we need to put into our attention is the fact that the Ministry of Education has urged all institutions to pay compliance to the provisions of the Act. And one of the issues that this institution has been requested to respond on urgently is to draft new statutes that are in line with the democratic system of higher education as contained in the Higher Education Act. What we have noted is that in most institutions, these statutes are drafted by either rectors alone or a team of management without any consultation with students, workers, and other constituencies in the institutions. We are saying it is important, comrades, for us to advocate and go out there and campaign for the mass participation of all constituencies in the changing of statutes. Because, comrades, these are the statutes that shape the future of institutions. These are statutes that are going to reverse the Apartheid Universities Act, Apartheid Technicals Act. And we feel that if we were to change, if we were to deepen our transformation of these institutions, we need to participate in those processes of the statutes. At a national level, the National Executive Committee should make a pronouncement to the Ministry of Education that when these statutes are submitted by institutions, they must also submit a report. They must also account on the process that led to the final drafts of the statutes. They must account who was involved in the process towards drafting those those statutes. But, comrades, at the end of the day, it is only at a local level that we can make the greatest impact. So we are urging branches to go and investigate at what stage is the drafting of statutes in their own institutions, and to demand a participation. Comrades, we are not going to dictate what should be the content of those statutes. But one thing that has come out clear in this political seminar, and also in the Commission on Education Transformation, is the need to advocate gender equality and advocate them within the statutes, so that they change the perception, the sexist perception, and also the demographics of our institutions. It will also be important to advocate for the provision of resources for disabled persons, disabled students, because this has been an area that has been neglected in the past. So as comrades contribute into the content and the provisions of these statutes, we feel that it is important to isolate at least those two areas. Comrades, I think I've already made an input on the whole question of power relations between councils and institutional forums. The gist of the matter, comrades, is that institutional forums are our own origin. We advocated for broad transformation forums, and the Ministry of Education has legislated them as institutional forums. But it is important not to remain at that, not only to plead victory, but it's also important to problematize the operations of those institutional forums, as I have done before. That is the area that relates. Those are the important areas of focus that relate to education transformation. With regard to SRC elections, the general observation is that in the past term of the SRCs, SASCO has been able to win a number of SRCs. It is important to win hegemony over these SRCs because we utilize these SRCs as instruments for our own transformation policies and transformation agenda. Now, if we do not have hegemony in these institutions, we face all sorts of frustrations because other people who have stood as independent candidates or who have stood under other organizations who do not agree with our policies are going to frustrate us. We feel that it is important, comrades, to have an overwhelming victory in the coming SRC elections. And after that victory, we feel that it is important for us to demand and enforce the implementation of SASCO's programs. SASCO prepares a lot of manifestos which announce on certain promises of what students are going to gain out of voting SASCO. But one major problem has been that you have been faced with a lot of ill-disciplined SASCO candidates who have not followed those mandates. As a result, this puts the name of the organization into disrepute. This also makes it impossible for the organization to deepen its transformation program. So, comrades, we are saying the main message is for all of us to commit ourselves for the overall overwhelming majority in the SRC elections. We need to improve on our national manifesto for the SRCs. And the Department of Political Education needs to put up a process during that improvement, which should include submissions from provinces and branches, because that national manifesto must ultimately reflect on the local conditions. It must reflect on the areas of need in the different local conditions. So we think that by the end of July, beginning of August, the National Office must release the National Manifesto, and that manifesto must be a culmination of a process of submissions from different provinces on its content. It has also been resolved, comrades, that we must campaign for the amendment of the Constitution, of the SRC Constitution. Obviously, the Constitution differs from the institution to institution. But because of the problem that we have had with comrades who do not take mandate, comrades who are not disciplined, who do not follow on the mandate given to them by the organization, or comrades who have stood as independents, who do not account to anyone, who do not care about accountability and taking mandates. We are resolving, comrades, to campaign for the amendment of the Constitution to the extent that only organizations should compete for SRC elections and not independents. And that should allow those organizations, if need arises, to recall those candidates whom they put forward. Because, comrades, at the end of the day, we cannot preach democracy and not practice it. It is felt that through that kind of amendment, we will ensure further accountability and mandate seeking. We will be able to have our comrades account to us what it is that they are doing, and if we feel that they have sabotaged or they have not fulfilled their mandates, we have got an opportunity to recall them. As it stands now, those constitutions do not make it possible to do so. Comrades, the other important factor is the issue of deployment. Who deploys who? Many people stand for elections on SASCO tickets, but you don't know where they come from. You have never seen them throughout the year. They've never participated in the structures actively. So, comrades, we are saying that the Office of the Political Education should immediately release a policy on deployment and cadre development, which will look at certain areas that reflect a SASCO candidate and what it means to deploy people into SRCs, which looks at issues of accountability, which looks at issues of implementing SASCO programs in SRCs. But, comrades, we also feel what is important immediately is for deployment committees to be set up at a local level. Committees that are going to already identify different able candidates for SRCs, and we start campaigning as as soon as possible, because in fact, in many other institutions, elections are taking place as soon as August. So we are saying that those election structures in the organization should be set up immediately after this seminar, which means that at the national level we will need to set up an election team, which should also be set up in provinces and institutions, branches. Comrades, the 1999 elections. The approach, comrades, is to say that we have worked and contributed to bring about a democratic state or a democratically elected government. We have been part and parcel of the mass democratic movements that have ensured that we dismantle the apartheid state. Over the years that this democratically elected government has been in place, there have been significant, notable delivery in a number of areas. To mention a few, in the healthcare, in housing, welfare, education, electrification, water provision, and land distribution.
Sorry for this interruption. Comrade, all comrades who are sleeping must wake up. Comrade, I wonder if you are dreaming about
So, comrades, our attitude is that we remain part and parcel of the national democratic revolution, and we don't only participate from an external center. We need to be part and parcel of deepening democracy. We need to be part and parcel of advancing the gains that have come across since the election of a democratic government. There are obviously certain weaknesses on delivery, certain areas in which this government has not delivered. But comrades, our approach is that it is not going to be a national party government that will do that, or an IFP government. It is going to be, we need to maintain our trust in the government that we have put in place. We need to advocate for the overwhelming majority of an ANC. Through that majority,